who should have priority access to the U.S. market? Should it be the factory that's located in Cleveland, or should it be the factory that's located in Beijing? That's the fundamental question. The radical left corporate media, the globalist corporate media that is attempting to criticize this plan take the view that the best place to put your factory should be in Beijing or Shanghai or Bangkok or anywhere but the United States of America. The president's view is we should do everything in our power to make it so that the best place to put your factory is in an American town. So we get all the benefit. We get the economic benefit, we get the social benefit, we get the community benefit, and most importantly, we get the national security benefit of having our critical industries here in America. And that's why we're calling it Liberation Day, because he is freeing us from a global economic system that has made us subservient to foreign nations and foreign powers.
Joining us now to discuss bridging business and policy, please welcome to the stage Sylvan Lane, Business and Economy Editor at The Hill, with guests Ashley Davis, partner at S3 Group, Eli Lehrer, president of R Street Institute, and Ron Busby, CEO of U.S. Black Chambers.
Thank you, everybody, for coming to our Invest in America Summit today. I want to thank our distinguished panel of guests. We have a lot of interesting topics to, to discuss about the economy, so I figured, we'd jump right into it. Starting off with, both the theme of our event and some of the comments we just heard from Stephen Miller on the screen before. When it comes to investing in America and what companies need to do to be able to build up in America, are they better off or worse off now than they were 6 months ago? Ashley, do you want to start off with that?
Sure, thank you, and nice being with you guys as well. So I'm an optimist in regards to investing in the United States. Staying in the United States is still the best place in the world to invest, and obviously there's concerns right now with obviously the stock market, the bond market, interest rates. However, what this administration is trying to do is make it easier to invest here. So if you look at what Doug Burgum's doing or Secretary Wright's doing in regards to eliminating some of the over-regulation that has paralyzed our country in regards to building things, the oil and gas industry, even wind and solar. I mean, they're trying to really unravel some of those over-regulations on a state level and a federal level to be able to invest here better. There are definitely rooms for improvement. I'm sure we're going to talk about tariffs, but the volatility right now is probably what the biggest issue is. But again, I'm an optimist. I think this is going to even out. And today, if they really do get more trade deals, supposedly there may be, I've been hearing this for a couple weeks now, but there may be more actually announced this week. I think that helps stabilize the market as well.
I want to pick up on that comment you made about volatility. Obviously these tariffs have been imposed, increased, decreased, delayed, paused. The steel and aluminum tariffs have, been increased several times over the past couple of days. When it comes to, the certainty and the stability businesses need to make these investments in these factories and, bring these the supposed benefits both economically and socially to these communities, what do these tariffs and the lack of consistency with which they've been applied do in terms of the ability of companies to know what they're getting into and actually invest in that? Ashley, if you wanted to pick that up, and then I want to hear everybody's thoughts on that as well.
I think that I keep saying that I think we have until September to kind of put all this to bed, because I think right now that a lot of the companies, at least the ones that I work with or boards I sit on, they're able to predict what they need to buy, for example, in regards to the supply chain. They have done a lot of those purchases already, through the end of the year. But I think once we hit September is kind of, and I have nothing to back it up, just that's what I feel politically that he has too, meaning the president, that there has to be everything in place going into the fall for some of these companies. But I think we have a little bit more room right now. And then the political aspect of it, we can go in later, but that's a tougher one. But if you look at if you look at investments that you're doing right now, I mean, if you're investing in if you've never invested before, nuclear, I think that nuclear is around. Obviously, the AI and the data centers are around. I mean, there's big industries. The housing market is a good place to make big investments. I mean, there are some areas to invest in now in the United States that we haven't been able to invest in before. And those are surefire, those are sure bets, in my opinion. I don't know what these two are going to say, but.
Eli, do you want to pick it up from there?
So I would agree to a large extent that the U.S. is the best place to invest, and that there are some surefire bets that didn't exist before. The problem I see, however, is that the policies of this administration, through tariffs, through tax policy, through regulatory policy, generally sort of directionally point in the right direction. Less regulation, taxes that are more pro-growth. The problem is that the inconsistency with which it's been implemented, the uncertainty it's creating, is not creating the environment that's needed to invest. I talk with any number of big companies, and time after time, I hear we're not going to invest until the third quarter. We're holding back on investments. And that just isn't a way to bring about economic growth. Tremendous inconsistency in policy and tremendous uncertainty in policy. That isn't a recipe for long-term growth.
Yeah, I think uncertainty is the word. The U.S. Black Chambers, we represent 380,000 Black-owned businesses across the country, but most of them are small businesses. And what you hear from a small business, and particularly a Black-owned business, is that they're going to be in a service industry or some type of consulting, and they do a lot of work with the federal government. And all of those situations right now are uncertain. And so for a Black-owned business, they're like, we need direction. And historically, it has come from the federal government and from leadership to say, here's the industries that are good to go into, here's the access to capital that is needed to order to start a business, to grow a business, and to have that sustainability. And all of those currently are facing challenges. And so as much as it is important to have the conversations about investing in America, it's got to be equally as important to talk about investing in America's Black and minority-owned businesses. Because when they do well and they have the certainty and the confidence to be able to invest back in themselves and their communities, then the rest of the country will follow suit. But just to say tariffs is going to fix the small business issues and challenges that are being faced today, I think is really unrealistic.
I wanted to, ask you a little bit more about, what are you hearing from some of your members and the member businesses in terms of how they're navigating, both the potential opportunities that are coming with the new administration and also some of the challenges that we've talked about in terms of the, certainty that they're looking for?
There was a poll, research by Pew that was just created, and successfully, it shows that 1 in 5 Black Americans say that owning a business is where they feel that their sustainability and their families and communities comes from. It gives them a self-esteem that they're going to be able to make the decisions for themselves to be able to make sure that they have sustainability. And when that is not there for them, then the opportunities are lacking as well. So most of our businesses are saying, hey, it's not a Democratic or Republican administration that is going to make Black or minority-owned businesses successful. But when you have an administration that is pulling back the resources, pulling back the technical assistance, the capital, as well as the contracts that have historically been there to be able to create that middle class, to be able to create contract opportunities for small and diverse businesses, when that is no longer there, then our communities and our businesses are also feeling left outside as well.
Did you want to jump in?
So yes, what you're saying about the importance of federal contracting, of federal spending, of direction from the federal government, is all important. Now, in some cases, I might not agree. I'm more with Congressman Schweikart on the idea that industrial policy basically isn't a good idea. But whatever you do, there has to be certainty created. And that's exactly what this administration is not doing. Time after time, they're creating uncertainty around it. Having a policy that you are cutting back federal spending enormously across the board, that would at least be a certain thing. Here, they're making certain cuts, often in places that are going to be painful, without touching the big elephants in the room: interest on the debt, Medicare and Social Security. This is a recipe for uncertainty and lack of investment, and ultimately significant problems down the road.
Can I just
Yeah, of course.
Because I think everyone agrees that the government's too big, and it's really hard to do. Going back to Reagan, Clinton, my former boss, George W. Bush, I mean, like, everyone's been trying to do it, and to do it is really hard. Obviously, you can argue one way or the other about what you feel about Elon Musk, but I think you guys were alluding to, he thought he was going to be able to do this a lot easier than it truly is. But what we're doing now is absolutely not sustainable. I mean, there has to be something. And if you look at even the House trying to make some of the changes in Medicaid, I mean, they're just getting killed. I mean, if I were a Democrat, I'd be doing the same thing to the House Republicans that they're doing. I mean, this is politics at the end of the day, too. But they're even making small changes is something that's politically, crucifying. And so I don't know the answer. If you have Ron Johnson and Rick Scott, so let's take the big, beautiful bill right now, if that's okay.
Yeah, please.
So if you have Ron Johnson, Rick Scott, obviously Rand Paul's another story because he has the debt limit issue. But they're saying exactly what you're saying. I mean, they in theory want to go back to pre-COVID budgets. Because of the amount of money and this is not a political statement, on both sides that needed to be spent, some might question, but in general, because of COVID. But do they not vote for the bill because of that? Do they raise taxes because, they can't get to pre-COVID budget? I don't know the answer. It's just something that is just so difficult to do. And how do we do it? I mean, because then if we do try to do it, then you're saying your members lose. Yeah. And so it's just a really difficult question.
The difficulty is enormous, as you say, and there's no easy solution. But when the president says, we're not going to touch Medicare, we're not going to touch Social Security, we're going to continue to increase the debt, and we're going to increase defense spending, that leaves so little of the budget that's the domestic and foreign non-defense discretionary. So you can't cut that enough to even move close to fiscal responsibility.
I do think work requirements does stay in the Senate bill. So Medicaid will be cut.
Yeah, no, it's certainly, a lot of big questions about that bill in the face of the Senate. I did want to, speaking of the bill, though, I did want to ask you three, obviously this is, in many ways kind of the foundation of President Trump's domestic policy agenda, massively important to him and Republicans moving forward. And there's, a lot in it. It's a big bill, one big, beautiful bill, as the president likes to say. I wanted to ask you three what you think the most significant parts of that bill are for businesses. There's obviously been a lot made of the personal income tax, the extension of the personal income tax cuts, but there's a lot of business provisions in there too. And Ron, I was wondering if there's anything, in that bill or just in the general policy pipeline that, you're looking at more specifically. And I want to ask everybody too. So Ron, if you want to start, and then maybe we could kind of go down the line and bring out the highlights.
Yeah, I think our issue is not as closely as tied to the bill, but really more his attack on diversity, equity, and inclusion. For us, it really helped us create a middle class for Black Americans with the safeguards that were being created to be able to have access to capital, access to contracts, access just to be able to participate. There were a lot of gains that were created and made over the last 50 to 60 years that are now being dismantled without much communication. And it doesn't feel like this administration is really trying to have a communication with America. It's making decisions very independent of what Americans feel. If you ask 70% of corporate America, as well as Americans, they will say diversity, equity, inclusion is positive. It creates a good atmosphere for both corporate America as well as the federal government. And so to attack that and to dismantle that, we feel is really going to set this country back several decades without us really having a plan to move forward with the federal government. So for us, it's really about how do we make sure that minority communities still have an opportunity to be able to participate in the largest economy in the world.
I agree entirely that broad participation in the economy is of vital importance. And you can point to some provisions in the bill, a generally better tax environment for businesses, expensing, all of these things that will increase economic participation overall. But again, it's being done so quickly, so randomly, and so many of the things may have blowback effects, as Congressman Schweikert was saying earlier. You have the possibility of this exploding interest rates, which undoes all of the good. And enormous debt is, in the long term, almost certainly going to do that. The result is that, yes, some of these programs might be good. Some of them probably aren't good. But simply saying anything with a certain label on it is therefore bad is itself a problem. I have a number of problems with some of these programs. We'd probably disagree quite a lot as to which particular programs. But the idea that anything that's labeled a certain way is by definition bad is not a good way to run a government.
I agree with that, and I will come back on that in a second, but I think the most important parts of the bill, 100%, are the individual income tax and the corporate tax. I mean, just from, I don't think anybody, no matter what political aisle you're on, that you don't want individual income tax, no matter, I know there is the tax the rich and whatever, and how you define the rich is a whole other conversation. But I think those staying in place, the corporate tax rate staying in place is probably the most crucial part of this bill. But I think what's getting in the way, which was what you're alluding to, is kind of the green tax credits that are being cut just because they were part of the Green New Deal or whatever it was called. Yeah. Because there are a lot of companies and projects that have been started, which the House kind of addressed, but in the solar and wind industry, that's very important. I also think that, nuclear is kind of becoming, as I mentioned earlier, in vogue again, so there are some tax benefits for the nuclear industry, but there is, going back to your labels, I think just some of those tax credits that were part of the Green New Deal are kind of getting unfairly treated because of where they came from.
Our street's work on the tax credits shows that overwhelmingly they're not very effective in really encouraging more investment or dealing with climate change, for that matter. There are much better ways to do it, including general overall tax policy and deregulation and permitting reform. All that said, pulling them out from under people when there's already steel in the ground is not what you want to do. You can phase them out more quickly, but some of the ways it's being proposed just aren't the right ways to do it. And then again, there are some things I personally think 45Q, the carbon sequestration credit, is probably a pretty good program and probably a pretty good thing to have. You don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, and the simple fact that it was invented by the previous administration does not necessarily make it bad. Often does, but not necessarily.
The House bill did deal a little bit with when things were shovels in the ground, how far along they were. So there is some, but I do agree, though, too, there are, I think the Senate is going to try to put some of those provisions back in the bill. You have that issue to deal with, you have the SALT issue to deal with in regards to, everyone knows what that is. So there's a few very big issues that are hanging out there before this bill passes, and whether, if the Majority Leader gets his way of putting it on the floor the week of the 23rd. We'll see.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting to watch to see how that bill comes together. One thing in the bill that I did want to mention a little bit, admittedly as a segue to a broader discussion about AI, is that the bill includes a provision that would basically limit the ability of individual states to have their own AI regulations, with the idea that it would eventually be preempted by a federal AI law. That provision has gotten some backlash from both sides of the aisle. I think Marjorie Taylor Greene mentioned, the notable congresswoman from Georgia mentioned yesterday that she might not have voted for the bill had she been aware that that provision was in there in the first place. What should the federal government be doing in terms of, making sure that AI is, appropriately regulated to, account for safeguards, but also not limit the ability of the United States to really dominate this new technology?
So the specific proposal actually comes mostly from R Street Research. Our Adam Thayer was the major person behind that proposal. Obviously, as you might guess, I think it's a good one, but surprise, surprise. But with all that said, what we do need federal legislation. We need a national preemptive privacy bill. We need to look carefully at tail risk for AI. It isn't that we don't need to regulate AI. We do. But a patchwork of regulations is exactly what the EU did, and it's exactly why the EU economy in 2009 and US economy were about the same size. Through overregulation, the EU literally killed the golden goose, and their economy is half the size today. There's no decline of the dollar in world trade. There's an enormous decline of the euro, and that's because primarily of overregulation. Having every state write its own rules is a recipe for disaster, is a recipe for chaos, and we need to have some sort of moratorium. This is what we did in the early years of the internet, 96 to 2001. We forbid most state regulations, and that worked really well. We should do the same thing again, and it should work, and it should allow federal action that creates a predictable, safe, and effective framework.
Yeah, I think small businesses are very concerned about what is and isn't going to take place. Our members are saying they're interested in finding out more, but they are concerned about the regulations because they want to make sure that they're not caught up in losing employees just to gain a profit, and then at the end of the day, they end up losing their business. Again, most of our businesses are going to be in the service industry, so they feel a little safer there. But when you're starting to look at the fact that college graduates or jobs are being replaced, both white-collar and blue-collar jobs are under attack, our small businesses are feeling like, okay, well, we have a lane that we can still adapt and participate in, but there's that uncertainty in reference to regulations of what it's going to mean to their bottom line.
For sure.
Yeah.
And Ashley, with the few seconds we have left, do you want to bring us home on that? What are your views?
Well, I completely agree with both of you, but I don't care what industry you're in, whether it's AI or whatever. You do not want 50 different states telling you how to regulate whatever you're doing. So I think the state, it's interesting, I didn't see that Marjorie Taylor Greene said that yesterday. I'm assuming it's because of some state issue within her district. But I think that you can't do business that way. And so being able to have, now I do have to caveat that by saying like the federal government's really bad at getting their act together and actually passing some of this. But there is a Senator Cruz regulation bill on AI that's broad, not too deep, it's not over-regulation, and that's probably the right way to go in regards to being able to get something passed.
Yeah, I mean, whatever the federal government does must be preemptive at the end of the day.
Yeah.
We can't have a federal regulation and then states can do whatever they want on top of it. That's the biggest recipe for disaster.
Well, I could talk about this all day, but fortunately for our guests, we have a very, very stacked panel and agenda ahead of us. Ashley, Eli, Ron, thank you so much for your time today. I look forward to continuing the conversation with all three of you afterward.
Thank you
For having us.
you.